Hi, everybody. Thank you for attending our presentation. My name's Andrew Littlefield. This is Daniel Plemmons, who's sitting on the floor here. And the star of the show, the dumbest laptop ever, on which we're going to be trying to run a couple of demos on stage here. Obviously, as we're showing we're actually showing alpha software on stage here. And so the likelihood of the demos going smoothly is, I don't know. And the likelihood of me giving a good presentation is equally, I don't know. So what we're going to talk about today is actually not what was on the agenda. On the agenda, I believe it was a future of VR gaming. This is actually a much better presentation. This is talking about VR in general and sort of what's going to be happening over the next year or so. So basically what we're going to be going over is we're going to start with a demo when Daniel gives me the thumbs up, or I could just start talking. And then we're going to be going into the current state of VR technologies, what's going to be happening in over the next year in terms of display technologies, and then what's going to be happening in terms of input devices and motion control. And then we're going to end up with another demo because we're a sucker for punishment, and we thought we would start the presentation with a demo that might not work and then end the presentation with a demo that might not work. Do we have a demo that might not work working?
Yes, let's give it a shot.
Okay, so can you switch over to the laptop output, please?
And of course, just as I say that, the Rift display mode comes up. Well, that's exciting. Andrew, why don't you talk for a minute, and then I'll...
Okay, well, I said it wasn't going to work, so you know that I'm being honest up here. So let's jump into the current state of VR technologies. So sort of the current state of VR technologies can be characterized by basically a largely tethered experience. Outside of Gear VR, most people's VR experiences involve a rather large Oculus Rift headset, typically a fairly stupid laptop or a desktop machine, and some form of controller. Then I think one of the things that we tend to forget is the incredible progress that we've made over the last sort of year or so. So what are the strengths of where we are today? So VR is now finally sort of generally available. If you have $300 to $400, depending on the exchange rate, you can actually pick up an Oculus Rift directly from their store and get it delivered to you in under a week. Compared to last year, you were going to have to go on eBay, spend $600 or $700, hunt around for a month, or at least I did, to get your Oculus Rift. So VR is now available to developers and is something that is, in terms of drivers and in terms of software tools, for both Unity, for Unreal Engine, those tools are available, or those engines enable you to develop VR experiences relatively easily. So availability is now quite good for developers. Not so much for general consumers, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but for developers, which I believe is probably most of you in the audience, the availability is good. The other thing that we tend to forget after we've been working in VR for sort of a couple of months even, is the wow experience associated with VR. This isn't another 3D television sort of experience where I'm not sure if any of you ever sort of got a 3D TV or saw a 3D TV at a store. I can remember seeing those and being told that, oh my gosh, like 3D television is going to be the future. And then I looked at a demo and I was like, really? This is what the future looks like? The future kind of sucks then. This is a bit boring. But when I first used VR after my brief foray into it in the 90s, which is dating myself horribly, I was absolutely blown away. I can remember my first VR experience being Minecraft and the VR Minecraft mod. I'm not sure how many people here have had a chance to play Minecraft in VR. Yep, well that's good, brief handful. The experience was absolutely incredible. It was one of those things where I literally thought, oh my gosh, this is the future. This is not 3D TV. This is incredibly cool. And so I think that the strengths that we have going for us right now, and when we sort of finally see consumer adoption of VR, is that it's an incredibly wow experience. But it's important that we start to talk about some of the limitations that are associated with VR as it stands today. So we're still kind of stuck with, at least with the Oculus Rift and sort of the current generation of HMDs, with display technologies that come from cell phones from sort of 2010, 2011. You're looking at a 1080p display. The resolution isn't that great. There's readability problems or legibility problems inside that with that display. We're using 1980s era device I/O. Most people in VR use a keyboard or a mouse still. And the keyboard and mouse has been around, actually, well, the mouse has been around since the 60s. Using keyboard as an input device for computers has been around since the 40s. But the mouse really became popular in the 1980s. So we're stuck with sort of 1980s device I/O. And then we're also stuck with 1980s era optics. I'm not sure if any of you have ever sort of taken your Oculus Rift apart and looked at the lenses. They're not that sophisticated, and it's not exactly surprising that we do see lens distortion. If you compare an HMD headset set of optics with a modern set of glasses, their delta is incredible, and there's a huge number of opportunities there for us to improve the overall experience associated with VR just by improving the optics and the lenses there. And then you have high-end compute requirements. I'm not sure, how many people here are developing in VR at the moment? Yep, we've got a handful of people. How many people here had to buy a new PC when they started to develop in VR? Yeah, it's one of those things where, in theory, a 2-3-year-old PC should be able to run VR pretty well. But unfortunately, the practical reality of it is that you need to have a PC probably built in the last year. You probably need to have like one NVIDIA 980, preferably two, if you're not going to get into the sort of vomit-inducing sort of 30 frames a second sort of zone.
Which is why we brought the craziest computer ever, so that we could have two 980s and a laptop.
Yes. So once again, this is the star of the show. We're just going to talk about the laptop and actually not worry about the rest of the presentation. So you need a couple of 980s. You need a high-end PC to really run VR. So there's a couple of interesting things that are occurring that I describe as force multipliers. So one is the Samsung Gear VR and other mobile initiatives, like the stuff that Google's currently doing with their Cardboard initiative. Samsung Gear VR at the moment has the best display that's commercially available on the market today. It's a 1440p display. The resolution is noticeably better than, say, Oculus or Gear VR. Or sorry, not Gear VR, OS VR. And I think that the potential for VR or AR as it relates to mobile devices is absolutely incredible. And then the other thing with the introduction of OS VR and OS VR coming in at a price point that's less than $300 is that there's lower price points coming into the marketplace right now. And those two things together could actually really accelerate the general adoption of VR as we see it today. So over the next year, there are many scenarios. I'm going to focus on two right now. The first experience I'm going to focus on could actually be one of my home machines. I have I'm really into space games, really into Eve, strangely enough. And I've dedicated quite a lot of space in my geek room, or the pit of despair, as my wife calls it, in my geek room to sort of having a really nice space simulator setup. And I look on that as being, if you were to sort of convert that into the VR world, I look on that as being very similar to the HTC Vive. You're going to need to have, say, half a room's worth of space to put the two sensors, one in one corner, one in the other corner, so you can walk around. I'm not sure if anybody's had a chance to use the HTC Vive, but the experience is absolutely incredible. Being able to walk around in VR is mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. And for me personally, I'm already trying to figure out how to get a device, and I've already sort of started to clear out my garage so that I can have enough space so I can walk around in VR as well. So that's sort of one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is sort of hardcore gamers that are likely to be getting into, or hardcore console gamers that are likely to be getting into things like the Sony Morpheus. This particular setup here could also be my home setup, as it involves 3 or 4 different consoles. Like, you've got a Wii U up there, you've got an PlayStation 4, you've got an Xbox One, and those are the sort of type of console gamers that are going to be buying into the Sony Morpheus immediately. However, while there are differences between the two types of consumers that are going to be buying into VR, either the high-end PC gamer or the hardcore console gamer, the thing that I think is most important to note is the commonality between the two of them. These people that own these setups, and I include myself here, are probably pretty geeky. So over the next year, I don't think we're going to see this. I don't think we're going to see a groovy hipster dude wearing a white turtleneck, having this super slick mobile experience, cruising around with a cool haircut, being in VR. I think over the next year or so, probably VR is going to, and AR is going to remain a fairly hardcore, and in the Valley, geek isn't at all an insult. The Silicon Valley, San Francisco, where I come from, it's sort of a badge of honor. I think it's still going to probably be a fairly geeky sort of, geeky sort of audience. And that's important to think about when you're developing games and developing game experiences. It means that you don't need to worry about in VR, well, I would request, please don't do this, creating Flappy Birds for VR. You can actually focus on developing real games with depth and gameplay that I think that will play much, much better with the VR audience than going for Flappy Birds immediately. Although I am sad to sort of note that Flappy Birds already exists in VR, so I'm probably talking a little too late. However, I would love to be wrong on this. I would love consumers to jump on VR because I think at the moment it's an absolutely incredible experience. So moving on to sort of more of the meat of my presentation here. So in terms of displays, we've got a couple of leading indicators coming out of Korea at the moment with regards to what sort of displays are we going to be seeing before the end of the year. Sharp just announced the first 4K LCD display. Actually, Sharp is out of Japan, but Samsung's also got 4K displays kicking around. The first 4K phone has been announced. It's got a 14 centimeter display, or 5.5 inches if you're from the US. Has an absolutely ridiculous pixel density on that display. It's 806 pixels per square inch, which is, to be honest with you, a little bit of an overkill for a phone. I'm not sure how many people have been sitting here thinking, do you know what, I really need a 4K phone. I really, really want to watch ultra high definition movies on my phone. Certainly, being the geeky guy I am, I'm interested in it, but it's not something that I'm going to be purchasing immediately for just my phone. However, what these displays are really good for is HMDs, or VR headsets. I believe within the next year, we're going to be seeing these 4K displays integrated into head-mounted displays. We're going to be seeing 2K per eye, and we'll finally actually be able to get rid of the screen door effect. Is that a familiar expression to everybody in terms of the little sort of pixelation that you get inside the Oculus Rift? We'll finally be able to see that go. And I think that sort of thing is going to be essential to really widespread consumer adoptions. Consumers aren't going to be as accepting of the screen door as we are. So do you want to jump into a demo?
Yes.
So we're going to do a little break from me just talking, and we're going to jump into a demo that is a nice lead into the next section of our presentation, where we're going to talk about input devices. So Daniel, do you want to kick it?
Yeah, so if we can just get this on screen, and if we could dim the stage a little, that would be awesome. Thanks. So, as you can see, I've got actually what you're seeing is the actual output from the sensors here on the front of my display. So I can actually see this chair here in front of me. I can see the world around me. I can interact with it. And then when I bring my hands up, you can see that our software is actually tracking the individual points and joints on my hand. It's tracking them rather accurately. And at the same time, I can also see the actual data coming in from the visual sensors, which gives me a great sense of the real positions of my hand. And we can use this to interact with things in a really interesting way. We can do things like actually deal with the occlusion coming off of one hand in front of the other because we have an underlying data model. And if I switch scenes here, we can actually start to interact with objects in the virtual space and see them also interacting in the physical world. And we've got a lot of fidelity here. We can really do some rather finessed interactions. And it's really interesting. When you get this sort of interaction going, you can people can jump in and act very naturally. The first thing I see a lot of people do when they put on a Rift is they lift their hands up and they start to and they look for them. And when they're here, it becomes very natural. And then with a little bit of training and a little bit of tutorial, you can have people doing really rather complex, rather finessed interactions. So this gets really interesting. And there's we'd be happy to show you a lot of the other demos we've been working on too over after the talk. So, and I think we'll show a little more at the end of some of the more game focused.
So we'll show, we'll have another chance for our demo to mess up at the end. So if we could go back to the slides. So, wearable sensors. At Leap, we produced the sensor that was sitting on the front of the Oculus Rift here. It allows motion tracking for both hands and objects, and it also allows for tracking, it also allows pass-through. So we can actually create AR and VR experiences as well. So we're very hopeful that our device will become an integral part of all VR experiences moving forward. However, the thing that we're sure about, and not just hopeful, is that some form of motion tracking will be necessary in VR. Soon as someone puts on their VR headset, as Daniel mentioned, they immediately put their hands in front of them. They're reaching around. And the keyboard and mouse are great as input devices, but essentially they're 2D input devices. And when you're in VR, you're in a 3D space, and you want an input technology and a method to interact with that 3D space naturally. We don't necessarily think that we're going to be the primary device in all VR environments. If you're playing a racing game or if you're playing a space sim, you're going to want joysticks or a gamepad. But for secondary controls and for interacting with objects, you can kind of imagine in a first-person shooter, you're running around with your virtual gun. You can hardly tell that I've sort of spent a lot of time in America as I immediately go to virtual guns. So running around with a virtual gun and you want to open a door. You're not going to want to reach around on your rifle and go, okay, where's the button that I can't really see in VR to open the door? You're going to want to be able to just reach out and open the door. And that's what motion sensing, sensors really enables you to do, or motion tracking. So what are the essential requirements of motion trackers? You want to have a wider field of view than your HMD. You want to be able to track your hands when they're just outside of your view, so that when you actually move your hands into your field of view, they're appropriately initialized, they're being tracked. You're going to want to have really high frame rates so that there's no latency associated with your hands. One of the most disquieting things about VR is when there's lag. And when you're actually using your own hands in VR, that lag becomes even more uncomfortable, because we're used to seeing our hands. As I'm talking here, I'm moving my hands all over the place, and I'm used to seeing my hands without any lag. You're going to want to have some form of underlying data model associated with the items that you track to handle occlusion. So as I look at my hand here, it's slightly occluded by the little presentation box I have. Or if I move my hands like that, it's slightly occluded. We call our data model that handles occlusion skeletal tracking. And so what do we offer you today? What is the little peripheral that we have here actually offer you out of the box? And it's something that you can just sort of purchase from our website for a very reasonable $80, if anybody's interested. We offer 120 frames per second video pass-through. With, at the hardware layer, 8.6 milliseconds of latency associated with video imagery. We get even better when it comes to hand tracking. So with hand tracking, we also offer 120 frames per second, but we offer an absolutely minuscule 4 milliseconds of latency at the hardware layer. So that means that there is no lag associated with using the Leap motion tracking device inside VR. And then we have a 140-degree field of view horizontally and a 120-degree field of view vertically, which exceeds the current Oculus Rift, which I believe is 110 degrees horizontally and about 90 degrees vertically. So you can track your hands when they're actually outside of your view. So where are we going? So this is actually a quick preview into a sensor that we have in the lab. We call it Dragonfly, and each sensor has a 3K resolution. So between two eyes, you'll actually have a total of 6K of resolution, which should be more than enough to handle your 4K display and handle pass-through associated with that display, so that you get a really, really nice, crisp, immersive experience when you're using AR or VR. We can actually, with this device, and we're really sort of quite proud of some of these specs, run at 225 frames per second color video pass-through. So latency is absolutely not an issue with this device, even less so than our regular peripheral. Up to 720 frames per second in terms of hand tracking. We have a massively expanded field of view. So this is up here, an image of one of our offices taken through our peripheral. And then you can see how much more of the office you can view using the Dragonfly. And hopefully the other thing you noticed about the Dragonfly versus the black and white images that we have for our regular peripheral, the Dragonfly is color. So I've been using the Dragonfly now for about 6 months, and it's not at all uncommon for me to be using one of our AR experiments and forgetting that I'm wearing the headset. And as you can see, I always have a Red Bull with me. And the number of times that I've actually reached up and hit myself in the face or hit myself in the HMD with my Red Bull is now countless, and is the subject of some amusement in the office, as people are always handing me things as I sort of smash them into my face. So basically each sensor has 4 pixel types, red, green, and blue to give you the full color image, and then IR that we use for tracking. So with that, we're going to hand over and show you publicly for the first time one of our latest demos, which we call Cockpit.
All right, we're up. So as you can see, I'm here in kind of my virtual spaceship cockpit. And the first thing that I'm able to do is, because we've got the pass-through overlay layer here, I can immediately grab this joystick and throttle that are sitting in the real world, and we've got some virtual ones aligned to it to make that even easier. And I can reach in and I can see all of my controls. I can easily interact with them. So I could be flying in this game and manage that very easily. If I have to reach away and touch something on the keyboard, I can see where my keyboard is. And then I can seamlessly look over here and pull up a menu and reach over and immediately just start interacting with virtual controls, transition seamlessly back to my primary inputs, and move over like this. And it becomes a very seamless experience. The other thing you'll note is, if you've used some of our previous demos, you probably haven't seen this before, but we're using the actual video pass-through data here, and we're able to do some pretty fun things with shaders to allow you to actually cut out and properly see your hand in depth. So my hand can be occluded by virtual objects. It can also properly occlude virtual objects. So I can come up here and set the power systems for my ship, go back to my throttle, drive around. If there's somebody else in the room with me and someone taps you on the shoulder or something, you can immediately see them and interact with them. Grab the aforementioned Red Bull. So there's a lot of really interesting interactions that this opens up for game developers.
Would you like a Red Bull?
Thank you.
Okay, so
really
that's our cockpit demo. If we could go back to slides, please. So we're coming towards the end of the presentation. With all of these presentations, when it's related to the sort of future of something, you're meant to leave your audience with something very profound and insightful. I was in a little bit of a rush when I was creating this presentation. So my last slide, although it's very profound and insightful, maybe isn't as profound and insightful as it could be. The next year should be really interesting. And I say that in jest, but I really believe that. I was trying to sort of find myself like a really good Arthur C. Clarke quote or something like that about the amazing futures of blah, 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 blah. I couldn't, but then I was thinking about all of the people that we've been talking to and all of the demos that we've got running in our labs, and there is no other way to describe it other than really interesting. Actually, there's maybe another way that I could describe it, but that would involve swearing. And as I'm representing Leap Motion here, I'm not really meant to swear on stage. But the next year should be really interesting, and you can replace really with whatever word you would like to. So that's it for the presentation proper. Are there any questions that I can answer? Okay, well, thank you very, very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you, Daniel.